everyone. This is John Handy, Communications Director for the House Republican Caucus, and I'd like to welcome you to our state operating budget rollout today. With us today are our budget leaders, Representative Drew Stokesbury of Auburn, Ranking Member on the Appropriations Committee, Representative Kelly Chambers of Puyallup, Assistant Ranking Member on the Appropriations Committee and Ranking Member on the College and Workforce Development Committee, Representative Chris Corey of Yakima, Assistant Ranking Member on the Appropriations Committee and Assistant Floor Leader, and Representative Drew McEwen of Union, Assistant Ranking Member on the Appropriations Committee, Assistant Floor Leader, and Ranking Member on the Commerce and Gaming Committee. With that, I will hand it over to our budget lead, Representative Drew Stokesbury.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Like John said, I'm State Representative Drew Stokesbury from the 31st District in Auburn, and I'm standing virtually, of course, in the middle of the Carbon River in the heart of the 31st District. Here in the legislature, I am the House Republicans' ranking member on the Appropriations Committee. So I am our lead on virtually all things related to the budget. I apologize if you heard that truck. Auburn is also home to a lot of construction activity these days. Presenting to you today and joining me are a few of my assistant ranking members on the committee, and I'll turn it over to them in a minute to talk about some more specific issues. But first, I wanted to briefly mention the outline that our budget proposal is taking. You know, it's no secret that this past year has been extremely challenging. It's been unprecedented in many ways, and it's affected all of our lives in ways we couldn't have imagined at this point in time 1 year ago. And our state budget has not been immune to those unprecedented challenges. When we left town at the end of last session, we had a modest budget surplus, and in June we had a revenue forecast that suddenly showed us with a $8+ billion budget deficit. Since then, though, the revenue picture has stabilized, and while there are certainly parts of the economy and many families that are still struggling, in the aggregate, tax revenues have rebounded, and the budget situation is stabilized. Depending on what you count for revenue assumptions and caseload maintenance level spending changes, we are looking at a very, very modest budget deficit as things stand, or potentially a slight surplus. But the legislature has solved much more complicated budget challenges than what exists before us today. And the proposal that we are presenting shows a path forward to fund a lot, if not all, of the state's critical and emerging needs and fund them as core priorities in the budget. And we can do it, as we show, without raising taxes on anybody or anything, and without cutting any critical services that people depend on. All told, this budget spends about $6.6 billion between the Rainy Day Fund and the new general fund. While we do use the Rainy Day Fund, it is only used to pay for one-time COVID-related expenses, so it doesn't create an unsustainable bow wave that we'll need to solve in the future. And we can afford to spend additional money because we've also identified $6.2 billion in near general fund savings. And the majority of these savings are things that shouldn't be controversial. It is using things like drawing down additional federal funds or deploying federal funds in a more creative way that frees up state funds, relying on dedicated accounts that have capacity to fund services that should have been paid for out of those accounts all along. It assumes savings that were already generated by agencies over the summer as they held positions vacant or had to delay expanding or implementing new programs. But it also identifies some additional savings areas that we think represent better policies and also better and more responsible uses of state tax dollars. Things like if a WISP study showed that a program has a zero cost benefit ratio or has a 0% chance of achieving positive outcomes, the legislature should revisit those programs. They might have been well-intentioned in their time, but when we have evidence that shows that it is simply spending money without achieving results, we should have the humility to revisit those decisions and chart a better path forward. And when you take all of these things together, we're able to fund some enormous programs that the state desperately needs, things that have failed to be funded for the 6 or 7 years I've served in the legislature. Things like the Working Families Tax Credit. It's existed in law for the last 12 years and never once been funded. Things like additional funding for foundational public health. Our budget proposal would provide more funding to local public health jurisdictions than the governor's budget would, And we don't raise taxes on health insurance plans to do it. We fully fund the Department of Natural Resources Forest Health Management Plan, and we don't raise taxes on property and casualty insurance plans to do it. We raise provider rates for Medicaid providers in primary care and behavioral health fields, which is an item that the governor vetoed last year and didn't propose funding again in his new budget. So I'm going to turn it over to my assistant ranking members and my colleagues in a minute, but I guess the bottom line is, we hear a lot of talk and rhetoric about helping working families, but working families deserve more than rhetoric. They deserve real solutions, and that's what this budget provides. This is a budget that will help the people of Washington, not special interests or government agencies or bureaucracies, but the people of Washington. Whether that's working families or growing students, vulnerable people, struggling small businesses. This is a benefit that this is a budget that provides real solutions for all Washingtonians, and more importantly, provides a very clear and cogent outline of how we can afford to make these critical investments, not by raising taxes, not by cutting vital services, but by making smart, creative, and common sense changes to existing programs that don't result in reductions in services. So with that, I will turn it over to Representative Chambers to talk a little bit more.
Thank you, Representative Stokesbury. I'm Kelly Chambers, representing the 25th Legislative District and serve as Assistant Ranking on Appropriations. We are really pleased to present a budget that is both fiscally responsible and reflects the priorities and values of Washingtonians. It addresses important priorities, as Drew mentioned, without having to raise taxes. And there are a number of tax proposals on the table this year. This budget demonstrates that we can take care of Washingtonians, especially after or during a crisis, without raising taxes. When COVID reared its head almost a year ago and the governor shut the entire state down, it was very uncertain for months what kind of economic situation we would be facing when we needed to build this year's budget. But the forecast is looking better than we expected, especially looking back at the large deficit we were facing in the summer. So with that, this budget really speaks to needs for working families, for students, vulnerable populations, and small businesses. When things shut down and students went to remote learning, families had to incur costs like buying a printer or a desk to even work from, and this budget addresses some of those needs. With respect to homelessness, this budget includes $200 million per year to cities to combat homelessness, provided they ban injection sites and clean up encampments near schools and parks. This is a reliable and stable source of funding that cities can count on, that's even bondable, and therefore cities can address homelessness and make decisions that fit each community uniquely instead of having to leave it up to Olympia bureaucrats to address. This budget makes 3 times as many investments in therapeutic community-based mental health services than the governor's budget. And while we are making a shift to providing mental health treatment in community-based settings rather than in state institutions like Western State Hospital, we believe this approach is a safer and a more responsible and realistic ratcheting down of state institutions. There is also funding for COVID precautions here to agencies to provide PPE and testing to clients and staff who continue to serve the most critical populations. In addition to the PPE and testing supplies, there are funds here for communities that need to create COVID floors or wings so they are able to quarantine residents and cohorts as needed and to continue to keep them safe. There are increases in this budget, as Representative Stokesbury mentioned, for an increase in Medicaid rates, more frequent nursing home rebases, and rate increases to DD and long-term care providers. These are really special people that work in these industries who provide some of the most important services in our state. And interestingly, there are some rental subsidies here where we are finding that it is less expensive to provide a housing subsidy for certain nursing home patients with in-home care services in place, which in turn reserves the beds in nursing homes for those patients who are most in need of nursing home services. So that's just a portion of it. And with that, I will turn things over to my colleague, Representative Chris Corey.
Thank you, Representative Chambers. My name is Chris Corey, serving the 14th Legislative District, Assistant Ranking here on Appropriations and Assistant Floor Leader. At the heart of those impacted are the working families across Washington state, from coronavirus, the shutdown, school closures, and our budget goes above and beyond to address those families and help them through this difficult time. First, I want to talk about a $600 million sales tax rebate that we've placed in this budget. And that sales tax rebate will help fund the working families tax credit. First time in 12 years. It's been in law and yet never has been implemented. Now, more than ever, families need more money in their accounts to do the things they need to do to get through this tough time. So we fund that, like I said, for the first time in 12 years. Additionally, we're looking at sales tax cuts for products that families use every day, such as prepared food, pump supplies, diapers, those type of things that cost a lot and really add up to the average working family. Childcare, another huge problem we've seen for years in this state, and the pandemic has only exacerbated. We're taking $114 million for grants and higher rates to keep childcare centers open so working families have places to send their kids so that they can go to work and earn a living. The school closures have been a huge impact to families across this state, but it's impacted those who are in most need of the help. We're talking low income families. And what we've done in this budget is provide $300 stipends to help offset some of the remote learning costs that parents have incurred through this continued closure of our schools. These are just a start. When you look at what has historically been a rough time for our state, our working families are getting hit now more than ever. And our idea for providing real solutions for Washington is to get more money back to people, not through growing government or having another program here or there, but getting money back into their pockets so that they can make the local decisions that we know will best improve their lives. Now, I would like to turn it over to Representative McEwen to discuss some more areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Representative Drew McEwen, the 35th District. Needless to say, businesses have been hit very hard through this pandemic and through the economic downturn that we've seen over the past year. So to that end, we provide a number of measures that address the issues that are facing businesses. A lot of it's revolving around B&O tax relief, including exempting behavioral health organizations from the B&O tax, deferring B&O taxes without penalty, so it gives businesses time to get back on their feet without having to put out that loan. We provide flexibility for renewal of liquor fees. Those are substantially high for the hospitality industry. And then also very important here is that we make it affirmative that businesses that participated in the Paycheck Protection Program loans, that those funds are not taxable under our B&O structure. And that is very important to provide that certainty to those businesses. And again, the hospitality industry has been hit especially hard through this. All businesses have. And, hey, great news. You survived through 2020. Here you are in 2021, hoping to be able to reopen or open more in capacity. But, oh, by the way, the state lost a lot of money through its failure to oversee the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. So we're going to step up, take the responsibility, and put $500 million into there to minimize the impact that businesses face. Some are looking at a 300 to 700% increase on that unemployment insurance. It's our responsibility and our duty to backfill that, to take care of that issue that has occurred. That was not the fault of businesses. The pandemic was not the fault of businesses, and certainly the loss of those funds to overseas fraudsters and the failure of the administration to oversee that is not the fault of businesses, and they should not have to pay the burden of that. We want businesses to survive so they can employ people, so employees can provide for their families, and that is crucial in this budget proposal. I'd also just like to mention that it's February 16th and this budget's being rolled out. And it just shows that when you put the priorities in place, you can do a budget and deliver it on time. It doesn't need to take the entire session. And so I just want to compliment Representative Stokesbury on his hard work to get this done in a time frame that allows for it to be dissected and hear from all voices with plenty of time still in session. With that, I turn it back over to Representative Stokesbury. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew. And I just want to add a couple things. First, echoing what Representative McEwen said, if House Republicans were in charge, we would debate budgets in the legislature much differently. And you're seeing that with this proposal before us. Like Drew said, it is February 16th, and we have a fully formed budget framework that we're unveiling to the public. The traditional way of doing things is to unveil a budget on a Monday at noon, ask the public to read it, all 1,000 pages of it, and testify by 3:30 that same day. Then ask members to vote out a committee 2 days later without enough ending fund balance left over to fund priorities that got missed. It's then sent off the House floor 2 days after that, and leaders retreat behind closed doors to negotiate with their counterparts across the aisle, across the rotunda, excuse me. And then the final version is brought out unamendable on the last or second to last day of session. There's a better way, and that's what we have before us. This is a framework. This is a starting point that we're unveiling to the public in the middle of February. This gives us several months to continue to make refinements. And importantly, there is ample capacity. There is a $750 million ending fund balance at the end of fiscal year 25 in this proposal. So if we overlook something that is important, if we reduced, if we made an agency take a savings that is actually going to cause a cut to a service that people need, we can buy it back. We have ample time and capacity to address any shortcomings that might exist. And more importantly, we have ample time to involve the public and other members in the process. You know, this is also a serious budget. Anybody who has any questions doesn't have to take my word for it. They can go to leap.ledge.wa.gov and see a full budget package with hundreds of pages of detail backing up and documenting every decision that we made, so they can judge for themselves whether or not our savings are actually cuts to services. And my email is public, and I invite folks to contact me if they're worried that we've accidentally cut a service that people depend on. But people can see for themselves that we're not actually cutting services. We are simply identifying some waste and inefficiencies and unnecessary bureaucracy and well-intentioned but non-performing programs that we spend state money on, but that can be reinvested in a better use. This is also a legitimate and serious proposal. The state has a number of needs that aren't fun to talk about, but you have to pay for to make things work. Debt service on new capital budget projects we pay for. The union contracts we approve. There is something in DSHS called the shared benefit rule that DSHS had to promulgate over the interim to comply with federal law. That's extremely costly and perhaps not necessarily the best policy, but necessary to continue to draw down federal funds. And this budget pays for that. It pays for every single COVID-related item that agencies requested in the governor's budget, whether that's PPE for their staff and clients or additional facility space to operate in a safe manner. The last point I'll leave you with is I just want to really reiterate how much this budget actually does for working families and for equity. You know, we hear a lot of lip service being paid by the governor and folks on the other side of the aisle about the need for working families. I just came from the Finance Committee where we passed another tax on working families by taxing their cell phone service. This budget doesn't raise taxes on the working families. It funds the working families tax credit, which is something the House Democrats, Senate Democrats, and governor have never once done. It further cuts the sales tax that is always decried as being regressive. And it also addresses, you know, for all the talk that the governor had about equity in his budget, this addresses the single biggest lack of equity that's facing our state today, and that is the continued anti-scientific shutdown of our public school system. The science and data has been clear for months that it is safe to reopen schools. They have the resources to do so, and this budget provides them the incentive to finally reopen. The opportunity and achievement gap was already far too big, and this body has been working hard to close it. But by continuing to let schools shut down, we're widening that gap. We are watching in real time as a generation of students get sentenced to cognitive and emotional delays, and that is flat out wrong. And we, as the adults and policymakers in the room, should be demanding much better for our kids. This is the equity issue of our generation, and this budget takes a giant step forward towards solving that. So with that, would welcome any and all questions. So I'll turn it over to John Handy to manage that.
Okay, let's begin with Austin Jenkins of Northwest News Network.
Thanks, John, appreciate that. I wanted to know, can we just run through the numbers here a little bit? Representative Stokesbury, can you compare, if you have it, your spending, total spending to the governor's, to the Senate Republican plan? And then I also just wanted to ask you about the $6 billion in savings. Have you actually accounted for every last dollar of that, or to what extent is this aspirational?
Yeah, thanks, Austin. It is not remotely aspirational. It's real. And as I mentioned, you can go to leap.ledge.wa.gov and see the exact same set of budget documents that are included every time the majority releases a budget. And you can judge for yourself what these savings items are, and you can count them up if you don't want to take my word for it, which would not offend me. To be honest, I don't know how much our budget spends on net compared to the Senate's budget or the governor's budget. I reviewed the governor's budget extensively when putting this proposal together to get a sense for what he and his agencies felt like were some of the state's most pressing needs. Some of those things I felt like were good ideas. Certainly we want to make sure that agencies can continue to deliver services as uninterrupted as possible. And if they need PPE or additional facilities to do so, they should be given that. And this budget funds every single last one of those items. He also had one or two good ideas snuck in there. His idea to provide districts with $400 million to help address learning loss that's happened during closures is a good idea. The only flaw is he doesn't do it soon enough, which is why I had an early action bill and tried to amend the Democrats' version of an early action bill to send money to districts to do this earlier. And this budget includes that money as well, but it actually includes more. It includes 500 instead of 400 million. He is correct that foundational public health is a core government service. And as we all witness over the past year, it's one we too often take for granted. So we found a way to fund more than he's asking for and do it in a way without raising taxes. So on important critical items, we are meeting or exceeding what his proposal is. In the aggregate, I don't know how it compares because I also felt like he was proposing some items that simply weren't necessary, especially not in a time like now with not a huge amount, but still some uncertainty ahead of us. In terms of where those $6 billion is accounted for, like I said, they're not aspirational. They are real savings items that are identified. Plenty of them add up to $1 million or $2 million here. And it's like the old adage says, except in reverse, $1 million here, $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. I have been for years advocating that we do a better job reviewing programs that are funded at one point in time that sound like a good idea then and might not work as well as intended. The legislature doesn't do a very good job at doing that institutionally, but I've spent the last 6 months doing that on my own, and that was how we were able to come up with a little over $6 billion in savings. And about half of these are simply using different fund sources to pay for the same services or capturing savings that agencies have already recognized. So at least half of them shouldn't even be controversial. And I will gladly discuss any of the other half-ish that people have a question about.
Austin, do you have a follow-up?
No, I guess I just wanted to know what's the total spend in your from your general fund?
I'm sorry, Austin. I knew there was something I was missing. In 2019, the total budget would be $51.5 billion. In 21-23, it would be $55 billion, and projected to go up to $58 billion in the 23-25 outlook period.
Thanks.
So it continues to grow the budget, but at a much more responsible on a much more responsible glide path. The budget has increased by 70 or 80% since the governor was elected. It's been averaging about 14% biennial growth since I've been serving. This budget would reduce the growth to about 4% a year, which is right in line with population and inflation and revenue growth. So we are able to continue to provide services, fund additional services, but do so in a way that doesn't raise taxes or create an unsustainable long-term budget.
All right, next we'll go to Joe Sullivan of the Seattle Times.
Hi, for Representative Stokesbury, is this an exercise in contrast solely, or are you going to your House Democratic counterparts to see what pieces of this you might be able to sell them on?
Yeah, I thanks, Joe. We'll absolutely be in conversations with Democrats to pitch them on this. I think it serves both of those purposes. Worst case scenario, it serves as a contrast for the public so they can compare and contrast the different approaches that each caucus would take depending on who's in charge. I think this also demonstrates pretty conclusively and definitively, in my mind at least, that new taxes simply aren't necessary. We can fund all of the services that people depend on. We can fund many new programs that the state has failed to prioritize over the last decade. And we can do so in a way that doesn't raise taxes on anyone, which implies that if the legislature still raises taxes anyway, it's by choice, not by necessity. But that said, I was sent down here by my constituents to make better laws, not just to make better suggestions. And so I will continue to implore my colleagues across the aisle to take a close look at some of these ideas we've come up with and hope that they're encapsulated in the budget proposals that they roll out later in the spring.
Did you have a follow-up, Joe?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we will go to Sarah Gensler of McClatchy.
Thanks, John. So Representative Stokesbury, can you detail, you might have gone into this a little bit with Austin's question, but can you detail just how much of that $6 billion in savings is accounted for by cutting programs? And can you name some specific programs that might see those cuts? And if any, how many state employees' jobs that might include?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I would say all total, if you look at only the items that involve reductions, there's about $6 billion worth of reductions here. About $1.8 billion of that simply comes from changing the fund sources that we use to pay for things, which is either going to be drawing down more federal money or using dedicated accounts where possible. None of those changes involve cuts to services or total funding levels. They simply involve funding shifts. About $1.4 billion involves savings that agencies have basically already recognized, either from their own conscious decision making, like doing less travel or holding vacant positions open over the past year, or things that they couldn't help but do, like when there was money provided to increase bed capacity in a certain program, but wasn't the ability to actually implement that increase over the past year. And then the remainder, which is about $3 billion, represents other proposals and policy ideas that we've come up with, and I'll try to give you just a couple examples. One is eliminating the additional compensation boost for National Board Certified Teachers. It is a wonderful idea, but we commissioned a study out of WISIP a couple of years ago that showed it is not something that's worth additional tax dollars to be invested in. The National Board Certification process does not improve how good teachers teach. It simply identifies who is already a good teacher. The National Board Certified teachers are disproportionately older teachers, more experienced teachers, and they're disproportionately from King County. So we're simply increasing the pay of the teachers who are already the best paid and already the least likely to leave. It showed only the tiniest of benefits to student outcomes, and it showed absolutely no change in retaining teachers. So I think we have much better strategies to try to improve teacher quality and improve student outcomes than paid bonuses to teachers who go through a certification process that doesn't actually offer any improvement. This proposal merges two pension plans. It merges a very overfunded plan with a very underfunded plan. It doesn't cut benefits to beneficiaries of either plan. But right now, because one plan is so underfunded, the state has to pay hundreds of millions of dollars a year in catch-up payments to reduce our unfunded liability. If you merge the two plans, it creates a combined plan that is 91% funded, which is right in line with all of our other pension plans that are among the nation's most highly regarded plans in the whole country. And so we can greatly reduce our payments towards the unfunded liability by merging the plans without actually threatening benefits. After we increased financial aid and made the state need grant entitlement and increased who could qualify for that, virtually every child in need we know now is receiving need-based financial aid. Yet we continued to allow state colleges the ability to grant discretional tuition waivers to students. But if the students in need are already getting state need grant or college-bound scholarship, the only ones left getting these fee waivers are either relatively affluent students or students from out of state. And I'm not sure that the best use of our tax dollars is to provide financial aid to affluent families or non-Washington families. So those are a few of the bigger dollar amount ones. But if you go to leap.ledge.wa.gov, you can see plenty of other examples that we found.
Did you have a follow-up, Sarah?
Just quickly on that last portion of my question, are there any FTEs cut as part of the savings there?
Yeah, I don't have a definitive count of how many FTEs might be reduced. Generally speaking, though, those kinds of questions are going to be up to an agency. The budget provides authority sometimes for agencies to hire FTEs, but that's not always a perfect correspondence to how agencies choose to spend that money. I would tell you that there are a handful of areas where we're cutting funding for specific groups of employees. It's certainly not a large percentage of these savings, but there were several examples we found where an agency had come to the legislature and said, if we get to hire 5 or 10 or 20 individuals to fill this particular oversight role, it will actually reduce costs overall because they'll provide more oversight, more cost controls, and we can save money even after you account for those salaries. Well, in all of these instances, there failed to be any savings, so we simply hired individuals who didn't provide any net benefit. So this budget proposal found 3 or 4 examples of that, and so we're removing funding for positions that were promised to save money but didn't actually generate any savings.
Next, we will go to Jerry Cornfield of the Herald.
Representative Stokesbury, I see in this that you are going with a zero-based budget review process, and you're accepting some of the ideas that the agencies had proposed for 15% cuts. How many of those ideas did you use? How much of that document that they provided are incorporated in here?
Thanks, Jerry. That's a really great question. I don't have a specific answer to it, but you will notice if you read through the documents prepared by our nonpartisan staff that some, not all, but some, a meaningful portion of these savings were identified as agencies as part of their 15% reduction exercise. I've not been shy about criticizing the governor when I felt like he needs to be criticized, but this was one of the few things I think he got right over the past year by asking agencies to engage in this exercise. It's also something I've had bills in the past that would require agencies to do this anyway, in good times or bad. We should be continually reevaluating what we spend money on, and agencies who have the expertise should be better about providing guidance to legislators about what functions they serve and what programs they deliver that are really important, and what are things that might have made sense at one point in time but are no longer delivering the most bang for the buck. As a part-time legislature, it's sometimes really difficult for us to have the best answers for that, and agencies are usually better positioned to do so. So I went through every single one of the agency's 15% reduction exercises from the summer. There were plenty of things that they proposed that would represent cuts to critical services and cuts to people who need those services. We didn't take any of those. We took ones that resulted in reductions to agency bureaucracy, agency overhead, and programs that simply weren't delivering meaningful results.
Did you have a follow-up, Jerry?
Just quickly, I'm not sure which member would be able to answer this, but does this budget assume savings from the different programs to release inmates early through either earned time or other steps? I think that's a large member.
Yeah, another great question, Jerry. The real simple answer is that no. That might be a decent policy conversation for another time. I'm far from a policy expert there, but by and large, I think that should not be part of the budget conversation. We shouldn't balance our budget on the backs of unsafe communities. I think the only savings item we had in Department of Corrections is increased electronic home monitoring for individuals who are already out on work release or parole of some kind. Very modest savings that we included because we believe in the policy, not because it was a way to create savings. But most, if not all, of the other proposals from the governor, I'll let our public safety experts debate whether or not that improves the efficacy of our corrections model or not. But as a budget matter, I don't really have a lot of interest in balancing our budget on the backs of unsafe communities.
Next, we will go to Essex Porter.
Hello, good morning. A question first for Representative Chambers on something that she had been talking about, but then also a follow-up for Representative Stokesbury. For Representative Chambers, you mentioned that there would be money for families to help pay for the costs of remote learning. I'm wondering if you could tell us more about how that money would be spent, what they could spend that money for, how they would receive that money, how much money they might receive to help with remote learning.
Thank you, Essex. Yeah, the plan includes $160 million, so families can take up to $300 stipends for low-income families to defray that cost of remote learning. There's also well, we mentioned it earlier, but the sales tax exemption on basic necessities like prepared food, diapers, breast pumps, and that is $293 million. And then a big emphasis on the working families tax credit, which like we had mentioned before, not funded in the 12-year history, but there's a significant amount in that fund, and it's $600 million. I don't know if Representative Stokesbury wants to add anything that I'm leaving out here.
If I could interrupt just a second, it sounded as if there was specific money for things that you might do, you might use for schooling, and that's what I was sort of interested in.
Yes, that's the $300 stipends to low-income families to help defray the cost of that remote learning.
Yes, and Representative Stokesbury, just to expand a little bit more on schools, what should the governor be doing to get schools open faster?
Yeah, thanks, Essex. First, just to add one extra piece of clarity on the $300 stipends. It is $300 to the parents of every single student, every single K-12 student who qualifies for free and reduced price lunch. It would be administered in the same way as free and reduced price lunches are. It's the exact same, it would be the exact same application form. So it's no extra administrative hurdle for districts or for families. Once a family qualifies for a check, it would be $300 per student. And the family, it would then be up to the family to use it how they want. Our intent would be that families use it to defray those costs of remote learning. You know, but we're Republicans who believe in personal responsibility and individual freedom. And we're going to leave it up to the families to decide the best way to use that money rather than create some complicated bureaucracy to get approval. If they want to use it to pay for faster broadband or extra device for their kids, great. If they need to hire a babysitter so that mom or dad can go work a shift, that's great too. If they just need help making ends meet, you know, they'd have the flexibility of doing that. As for what the governor can do, you know, I think his moral leadership is needed more than ever. He talks time and time again. He can't have a microphone in his hand for more than 60 seconds without talking about the science and data that he wants to follow. Well, the science and data on school openings has been crystal clear for very long, that there is virtually no risk associated with opening schools, that teachers are at far greater risk of contracting COVID from living their life in their community and going to the grocery store or the bank or doing whatever you and I might do, Essex, than they are from teaching a room full of minors. This is the equity issue of our generation, and I think the governor's leadership is desperately needed. He has shown on the issue of schools flashes of it, but I think much more can be done. I think rather than making this opening guidance, rather than giving all of the control to districts, there can be a better balance of district control, but also state mandates. Our Constitution is crystal clear. Education is a state's paramount duty. And if we want to live up to that, which I think we're constitutionally obligated to do, the state does have a role to insist on districts that they open to in-person instruction.
All right, next we'll go to Brandy Cruz of Q13. Are you there, Brandy? Okay, we'll come back to Brandy. Next, Laurel Depkovich, the Spokesman Review.
Thanks, John. This is probably for Representative Stokesbury. We're likely in the next few weeks, few months, to see some sort of federal COVID stimulus package. So can you talk about what you might be anticipating in that and how at all that might fit into this plan that you have?
Yeah, thanks, Laurel. You know, I've been so focused on our problems here in Washington, I haven't kept up with the day-to-day of committee maneuverings in Congress, but from early indications, it appears that the state is likely to receive a significant amount of funds for a variety of uses. And I think it just proves even more conclusively how little new taxes are needed. If we can create a budget, which is what we're presenting here today, that doesn't raise taxes or cut services before we get several $1 billion in federal aid, imagine what we could do if we did have that money. There is no reason to raise taxes in Washington state this year except by choice. It is definitely not necessary to solve our budget situation. You know, I am hopeful that if the federal government does pass a package, it will include funds to help our unemployment insurance system, which is funded through state money in this proposal. I'm confident it will provide additional funding for schools, which should provide even greater incentive for them to reopen. You know, for all of the attention that our K-12 system gets and deserves, funding per pupil is already up by about $1,500 per student this year compared to last year. We are giving districts all the tools they need to succeed. What's needed now is some firm leadership that requires them to reopen. So, you know, I look forward to seeing what Congress sends to the states. You know, there's a reason though that I'm in this Washington and not that Washington. I think whatever they send will only further prove that new taxes aren't necessary.
And did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just briefly. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about why you released this plan so early when you don't necessarily know about federal funds or an updated revenue forecast or things like that.
Yeah, you know, as Representative McEwen alluded to, it's because I think the budget is the most important piece of legislation that the state passes every year. And I think there's a much better way in which we can debate it as a legislature and include the public, our colleagues and other stakeholders in the process. I think the old way of doing things was simply jumping through hoops, but outcomes were predetermined behind closed doors. And I think that the Washington public deserves a lot better from their elected representatives. I think a much better approach is to do what we've done here, which is to present a starting point. It's a work in progress. Like I mentioned, there's a $750 million ending fund balance. So if there is a critical need that was overlooked or a savings item that would result in cuts to services that we didn't want to make, we have capacity to buy that back. If the next revenue forecast that comes out in a month shows additional revenue, there will be even more capacity to make even more investments. If additional federal money comes, there'll be more capacity to make more investments. But you know, things will always be in flux, and you know, if we always wait until we have the latest information, you know, then there'll always be another incentive to keep waiting until there's more information. You know, budgets exist on a perpetual basis, and I think this is a pretty reasonable point in time to give the public a starting point that we can focus discussions around. And if the situation evolves and there's more funds available, you know, that's just a win for the people of Washington.
Next, we will go to Keith Eldridge.
Yes, still working from home on the banks of the White River in the 31st District. Representative Stokesbury, back to what Essex was talking about. In getting schools open, would you be in favor of having teachers be vaccinated in Group 1B, Tier 1, and move them up and be able to open the school safely?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I think that's a great idea. Republican ranking member on the Education Committee, Alex Ibarra, and his Senate counterpart, Republican Senator Brad Hawkins, sent a letter several weeks ago to the governor requesting that teachers be moved up. Representative McEwen has a bill that would require teachers to be moved up in the vaccination process. I had a bill, 1334, that provided a variety of early action spending items using the rainy day fund. that would have required teachers to be moved up in the vaccination process. And we offered an amendment on the House floor, Republicans did, to House Bill 1368 that would have required, among other things, teachers be moved up in the vaccination schedule. You know, certainly epidemiologists have a lot of difficult decisions to make because human lives are at stake, and I understand the need to get this right. But there's a downside of letting perfection be the enemy. Letting perfection be the enemy of the good. I think that's how the phrase goes. In that if we delay too long by trying to come up with the exact perfect prioritization scheme, we waste time and we allow more people to go unvaccinated. And if vaccinating teachers is the difference between opening schools and not, I think when you balance all of the benefits and harms and consider, you know, not just vulnerable populations, but also our vulnerable children and how badly they need schools to reopen, I think moving teachers up in the vaccination line is, you know, very, very sound policy if that's what it takes to open up schools.
Thanks. I'm good.
Okay. And then I believe the last question will go to Hannah Scott.
Hi, this is for Representative Stokesbury. Can you speak some on what the budget includes regarding homelessness investments?
Yes, thank you, Hannah. I wanted to highlight this again. Representative Chambers mentioned it, but I think it's so important, it's worth repeating. You know, the governor's proposal invests some money towards homelessness, but it would peanut butter the money around to the same programs using the same strategies that we have been doing for the past several years, as we've seen homelessness climb by 240% over the past 3 years. There is, like many of these things, there is a much better way. The people of Washington who have to live in these communities where there are so much visible homelessness, I think deserve safer communities as well. And the solution we've come up with is a way to deliver money directly to cities and counties to the tune of about $400 million a biennium that would be made available to any city or county who agrees to two simple things. Enforce no camping zones within 1,000 feet of schools, parks, and playgrounds, and ban heroin injection sites. If cities can agree to those two things under this plan, they would stand to get $400 million a biennium that they could then use however they wanted, whether that's services or shelters or some combination thereof. They simply need to agree to two very baseline policies, and after that, it will be up to local jurisdictions to decide what's best for their communities, not Olympia bureaucrats. It's a plan that provides local governments with the resources they need to fix the problem. It puts the state's skin in the game so that cities are improving their services together rather than risking one city improving more quickly than another and becoming a magnet. You know, I think it represents a way to tell our constituents that, you know, we're no longer just going to continue to throw money at the problem. We're going to demand results in the form of safer communities with you know, no encampments around parks and playgrounds and no heroin injection sites across the street.
Did you have a follow-up, Anna?
Just quickly, kind of the same question on your behavioral health dollars. It looks like the community-based behavioral health is really the focus in this budget with more money than what the governor had put in. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, another great question. I think everybody in Olympia, the governor, all four caucuses agree that the correct approach is to drive more funding out to community-based options and reduce our reliance on the state hospitals, which are a very outdated and inferior method of delivering care to those who need it, and also just an absolute waste of taxpayer dollars. So yes, as Representative Chambers pointed out, our plan invests 3 times as much money in those community-based solutions as the governor's plan. Another important thing to note is we also close down the state hospital wards more slowly than the governor does. And that's not because we like that model of care. In fact, we probably hate it more than anybody else in Olympia. It is a money pit, and the governor has demonstrated a complete inability to properly manage his agency staff there. However, if you shut down the state wards too quickly before you can scale up capacity in the community, you risk not having enough services. And we're already stretched too thin as it is. So, we want to make sure that we don't shut down services at the state hospital more quickly than we can open up beds in the community. So we're not only investing more in the community, but we're being more cautious about shutting down wards at the state hospital than the governor is, being more cautious and more realistic.
Well, I believe we got to everyone's questions. Did you have any closing remarks, Representative Stokesbury?
No, thanks, John. I don't have a lot to add other than really appreciate everybody joining us to ask questions, and really appreciate everybody tuning in online. Proud to work with my colleagues here, Representative Chambers and Corey and McEwen. They're the assistant ranking members on House Appropriations with me, and they do a great job helping develop budget solutions. And what you've seen here is the approach that House Republicans would take if we were the ones in charge. It is a budget that provides real solutions for working families, for struggling students, for vulnerable people, for small businesses that have been devastated by the pandemic, and frankly, for all Washingtonians. And we deliver those solutions without raising taxes or cutting services for anyone, by having the honesty and humility and courage to present ways to pay for it. And welcome the public's feedback, but I'm pretty proud of this document, as I think it represents priorities we have as Republicans to provide services to those who need them, but without raising taxes on the public.
Well, that concludes it. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being with us today, and we look forward to the budget debates ahead. Thank you, everyone.